Good afternoon, and welcome to the Subcommittee on Federal Workforce, U.S. Postal Service, and Labor Policy. Today we have two panels that will be having testified before us. I do want to note, though, that we probably will have to take a break in between 2 and 3 for two votes, so we'll have to take a temporary recess for about 30 minutes at that time, and then reconvene for the specific purpose of continuing our testimony. Hopefully, we'll be able to get through the first panel before we have to go do our votes. With that, I will call the committee to order, and as is custom with the whole committee and the subcommittees, I will read the mission statement of the Oversight Committee. We exist to secure two fundamental principles. First, Americans have a right to know that the money Washington takes from them is well spent. And second, Americans deserve an efficient, effective government that works for them. Our duty on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee is to protect those rights. Our solemn responsibility is to hold the government accountable to taxpayers, because taxpayers have a right to know what they get from their government. We will work tirelessly in partnership with citizen watchdogs to deliver the facts to the American people and bring genuine reform to the Federal bureaucracy. This is the mission of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. Today, we are here to discuss whether Federal employees are adequately compensated. I'll begin with my opening statement and then defer to the Ranking Member Lynch for his. According to the Office of Personnel Management, the average salary for Federal employees was $74,311 in 2010. The average private sector worker earned $50,462, according to an August 10, 2010 analysis conducted by the Cato Institute. The Federal Government also pays an average of 36% of employees' base health insurance and pension benefits, in addition to generous paid leave. Taken together, Federal employees on average earned $101,628 in total compensation in 2010, nearly 4 times more than the average private sector worker. The members of this subcommittee recognize that our talented workforce performs critically essential functions and missions throughout the government on behalf of our nation. We appreciate their service. Federal employees should be compensated fairly, yet current Federal salaries and benefits are not in line with the marketplace when compared to the private workforce compensation. In a time when our economy is in a recession, the contrast between the government and private sector pay is troubling. The Federal Government has no incentive or obligation to reduce salaries in order to be competitive to stay in business. It can simply borrow more money or raise taxes. With Federal spending and unemployment at or near record highs, this hearing presents an opportunity for lawmakers of this committee to hear important testimony from our distinguished panelists on how best to address the growing pay disparity between the Federal civilian workforce and the private sector workforce. Over the past decade, compensation of private sector employees has not kept pace with that of Federal employees. Moreover, Federal workers receive generous benefits, vacation, health insurance, pension plans, retirement savings, and disability pay. These benefits greatly exceed those that are normally provided to the private sector workforce. Last November, President Obama announced a 2-year pay freeze for Federal employees. Unfortunately, the pay freeze did not impact salary increases driven primarily by the passage of time or bonuses, meaning President Obama's pay freeze wasn't really a freeze. Additionally, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Federal Government grew by 157,000 people from December 2008 to 2010, while private sector lost 8.8 million jobs. The unemployment rate hovers around 9%. The President's budget requests an additional 15,000 new Federal workers for the fiscal year 2012. Our taxpayers can no longer be asked to foot the bill for these Federal employees while watching their own salaries remain flat and their benefits erode. Congress has an obligation to consider all policy reforms that overhaul Federal compensation, reduce costs, and better align with the private sector. I thank the witnesses all for appearing today, and I look forward to your testimony. I now recognize the distinguished Ranking Member from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the witnesses for their attendance here. Good afternoon, members of the committee. The topic of today's hearing regarding Federal employees' compensation requires us, I think, periodically to review the way we are paying our Federal employees, reviewing the pay levels and benefits that they receive. But recently, this topic has generated much debate. As stewards of the people, we should conduct robust oversight into the Office of Personnel Management's pay-setting practices, and we owe the U.S. taxpayer full transparency in this area, as well as assurance that the salaries and benefits provided to our Federal workers are reasonable and appropriate. I note that the debate over Federal employee benefits predated the 1883 enactment of the Pendleton Act overhauling the patronage system, and I am quite confident this debate will outlive the service of our committee. Like all Americans, Federal employees are not immune from our nation's economic and fiscal challenges, and they understand the sacrifices called for in the 2-year pay freeze enacted this past December by Congress and the President. However, we need to be careful not to get caught up in the oversimplistic data comparisons between private sector and Federal jobs. A recent New York Times article pointed out that when comparing private and public sector occupations, the clearest pattern to emerge is an education divide. The most reliable factor in predicting compensation levels is actually the level of compensation, the level of education. And when comparing private and public sector occupations, the clearest pattern to emerge is an education divide, a divide that has grown more pronounced in recent decades. Today's Federal civilian workforce is highly educated, with over half of all Federal employees working in the 9 highest-paying professional occupations in the country. It is also a workforce marked by a declining number of blue-collar workers, dropping from over 30% to just under 9% of the workforce in the last 40 years. So the Federal employees are a more professional level of employee. We've contracted out most of the blue-collar jobs, the lower-paying jobs, which is why you get a discrepancy when comparing Federal employees to the general public. In light of the 2-year pay freeze, which is squeezing the pockets of Federal workers who are also facing ever-escalating health care costs, today I am reintroducing my bill to inject cost transparency into the Federal employees' health benefit programs, contracts between health plans and pharmacy benefit managers. This bill will lower Federal employees' out-of-pocket spending and the program's operational costs, resulting in a win-win for both Federal employees and taxpayers. I look forward to hearing from the distinguished witnesses assembled here today, as your expertise and guidance on compensation issues enables us to better forge a high-performing civil service that is prepared to meet the challenges of the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Members may have 7 days to submit opening statements and extraneous materials for the record. We will now welcome our first panel, the Honorable John Berry, who is the Director of the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. Mr. Berry, pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses must be sworn in before they testify. Please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Let the record reflect the witness answered in the affirmative. Mr. Berry, please limit your opening statement to 5 minutes. We do have your testimony, and we are grateful for that, and we are very grateful for you to be here. You may begin.
Thank you, Chairman Ross, Ranking Member Lynch, and members of the subcommittee. It's an honor to be here with you today, and I appreciate the opportunity. I believe that the members of this subcommittee and I and all Federal employees share the goal of making government more efficient while improving services, and I look forward to working together with you to accomplish that. President Obama said it best last week when he said, I quote, "I don't think it does any good when public employees are denigrated or vilified or their rights are infringed upon. We need to attract the best and the brightest to public service. Our times demand it." End quote. Our need for great workers could not be more clear. Federal employees hold lives in their hands and oversee large sums of taxpayer dollars. We need talented and innovative people at the Department of Defense supporting our warfighters. We need great doctors and nurses at our Veterans Hospital doing life-saving work. And we need tough men and women at the Departments of Justice and Homeland Security to protect us from another terrorist attack. And it is just a fact, Mr. Chairman, in order to get these workers, we must provide pay and benefits on par with other large companies for whom we compete with talent. We cannot and should not be the employer of last resort. Despite the complex challenges we face, the Federal civilian workforce is virtually as small today as it has been throughout the modern era. In 1953, there was one Federal worker for every 78 residents. Today, 2009, it was one for every 147. President Obama has frozen annual pay adjustments for 2 years. The raw comparisons of average pay between Federal and private sector employees often can ignore important differences between skill levels, complexity of work, scope of responsibility, size of organization, location, experience level, as well as exposure to personal danger. Even comparisons that purport to compare employees in the same occupations can sometimes be misleading. For example, some claim that Federal attorneys make more than private sector attorneys. In fact, while more than half of our general attorneys in the Federal Government earn less than $90,000 in their first year of service, the median first-year salary for comparable attorneys in the private sector is $145,000. As another example, Federal cooks may seem overpaid until you consider that many of them work in our prison system, where they supervise inmates in a very dangerous environment. The Federal Government, like most large employers, also provides an array of benefits. While we need to do this to be competitive, note that these benefits are not free to our employees. Employees share in the cost of those benefits and in many cases pay 100% of the cost. For health benefits, enrollees share 30% of the premium costs. For dental and vision, they pay 100% of the cost. For life insurance, they pay 66% for the basic premium, but 100% for any coverage beyond that. For long-term care, they pay 100%. I'd also like to note that Congress and President Reagan reformed our retirement benefits 25 years ago, and this has avoided the struggles that State and local governments are now going through. Those reforms guarantee that our FERS retirement system is financially sound and fully funded at 100%. Bottom line, this Administration is committed to providing the superior service the American people expect and deserve. Managers and employees who aren't doing that should be held accountable and ultimately fired if they don't improve. There should be no place in the Federal Government for non-performers to hide. Our pay system is not perfect. I have said before, it is 6 decades old and could use a re-examination. We are required by law to reduce all of the comparisons to one average number. This is imperfect and does not reflect the complexity of the workforce. But even so, we must reject misleading uses of data that perpetuate the myth that Federal employees are as a whole overcompensated. They are not. Our wages and our benefits are fair and they are competitive. Any reforms we undertake must meet the following principles that our existing GS system does well: transparency, equal pay for equal work, no political influence, and the ability to recruit and retain the workforce we need. This is how it must be if we are to recruit and retain the best workers and carry out our critical life-saving and life-enhancing missions. Falling behind is unacceptable. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Berry. I will yield to myself 5 minutes for questions. Mr. Berry, I note that in the President's January 2011 pay agent report, it showed a 22% difference between Federal employee pay and private sector pay. And I was wondering, did that include benefits, that assessment, that report?
No, that is focused specifically just on the pay.
And subsequent to you testifying, we'll have another panel. Mr. Biggs will testify that Federal pay premium of 14%, and when combined with benefits premium of 33%, total Federal salary and benefits are really nearly 25% above those of similar private sector employees. And Mr. Shirk will testify that Federal employees earn a total compensation of 30 to 40% greater comparable than private sector workers. Do you agree with their findings?
Absolutely not.
And why not? I mean, because in one sense we're talking about strictly compensation, and the other we're talking about compensation and benefits.
If we'll stay for compensation for a second, Mr. Chairman, I agree. I'm happy to look at them together. But for purposes of this discussion, it's easier if we can keep them separate for a moment. Their comparisons are based on gross averages. As Congressman Lynch mentioned, The Federal workforce is now a very skilled, white-collar, high sophisticated workforce. It used to be 40 years ago, over a third of our workforce was blue-collar. Less than 10% is today. So we need to compare the Federal Government with like to like. What the Bureau of Labor Statistics does in the Department of Commerce is they go into literally every locality, every one of your states in the country, and they will compare entry-level, mid-level, and senior-level career for each position. So they'll look at an engineer, for example. They will find a job in the private sector that is almost duplicative. And the private sector doesn't use the GS system. So you can imagine this is very exhaustive, it's expensive, it takes a lot of work. The work that you're going to hear from in the next panel, they don't have the resources to do that. The Bureau of Labor Statistics does that on an annual basis for us, and that's the data we're comparing. So we're getting real comparison of like jobs to like jobs. The averages you're going to hear about from that panel are looking at the total labor force of the civilian market. The primary jobs in the private sector are retail clerks and service workers, waiters and waitresses. We don't have those in the Federal Government. And those that we do are generally provided on a contract basis with the private sector. So that average, you can see, pulls down the private sector number, but when you compare engineer to engineer, lawyer to lawyer, doctor to doctor, nurse to nurse, what it shows consistently for 20 years is that Federal employees lag the private sector.
But wouldn't you also agree, because I don't believe OPM considers the job security as a criteria when determining the value of a job. Is that correct?
No, sir. Obviously, working in the Federal Government, our mission is long-term in nature. And
it should be for any employment. I mean, people go into employment for careers and not to change jobs through a revolving door. And I guess my question is that when you look at fiscal year 2010, the quit rate for GS employees was 1.5%, and the layoff rate was 0.37%. And do you have any opinion as to how that would compare to the private sector?
Our attrition rates pretty much track the private sector. I have heard some misinformation from some folks talking about that the Federal Government doesn't have a retention problem. Let me just give you doctors and nurses. In 2005, we hired 5,300 of them. As of today, we have lost 2,300 for a quit rate of over 43%. I have a retention problem. And that is primarily based when we are talking to employees as they leave, one of the biggest and leading concerns is the fact that they're underpaid.
But again, speaking as the whole Federal workforce, we're only looking at a 1.5% quit rate. I mean, so I wouldn't consider that to be so much of a problem. If it was 40% as a total of the entire workforce, then I would consider it a problem. But let me ask you, you talked about highly skilled occupations such as engineers and lawyers being paid below the market. Are there any circumstances or instances where Federal employees are paid above the market?
Absolutely. Yes, sir. I mean, the average, when I say, I do not mean to represent, when I say the 22% pay gap that the Department of Labor references doesn't apply to each and every job or each and every employee. That's a gross average, which means some employees are paid more, some are paid less, some are paid the same. Clearly, to get that number of the gap, the clear majority are paid less. There are some that are paid more.
Real quickly, I've just got a couple of seconds. How many days of paid leave are Federal employees entitled to? And do you know?
We can give you, it varies based on years of service, Mr. Chairman. So if I could, I'll just provide that to you for the record.
Okay. Thank you.
You'll have it exactly.
Thank you. When I see my time's up, I'll now recognize the distinguished gentleman and ranking member from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Director Berry. I want to thank you for the good work you're doing over there. One of the things I just want to start out by pointing out is I noticed behind me there's a chart here, employment changes, that the Federal Government added 157,000 jobs. I just want to, now this is 2008 to 2010. Now you would think that that meant that employment at in the Federal sector actually went up. I went back and I got the numbers because I was surprised by that number, and I went back and actually calculated the number of separations, the number of people who left the Federal Government. We had 206,000, almost 207,000 leave in 2010, 90,000 in 2009, just over 90,000, and 219,000 in 2008. for a total separation of 616,359 employees. So while they're saying there's 157,000 new first-time employees, there's also been a reduction of 616,000 employees who left. And I think that also speaks to the argument of job security. If 616,000 employees, and these were deaths, firings, these were quits, these were retirements, all combined. So it does, I think, provide a little wider picture. Director Berry, much is said of the general schedule's lack of performance management, mainly its inability to appropriately reward individual performance. I think it was because of some of those concerns, back in 2009, we experimented with an alternate pay system at the Department of Defense called the National Security Personnel System. We spent hundreds of millions of dollars implementing the new system, and oddly enough, we had 0.8% of people who usually are rejected for step increases under the old system. And under this new system, this pay for performance system, 0.2% were rejected for their step increases. So with the new system, on pay for performance that's been suggested as being an alternative here, we had less people get disciplined or rejected for their step increases. So I'm just curious. It seems like the managers were doing the same thing under the new system as they did under the old system, and I'm just curious if you think that's a viable alternative here.
Well, Mr. Lynch, I think you hit on 2 points that I think it's important for the committee to keep in its sights, if you will, as you move forward on this path. First is, the Congress repealed NSPS, and so the Defense Department's been moving employees back into the GS system. If you think that their pay-for-performance system, NSPS, is going to save the taxpayer dollars, what we found is that 20% of the workforce in moving back is on retained pay, meaning that they are making more than they would have made had they been in the GS schedule. And so, therefore, they're going to stay frozen until the GS schedule catches up with them. Now, that's a big number. The second point is, it goes to something I've learned in the 2 years on the job here in working on this, and I've spent a lot of time looking at pay, performance, and the combination thereof, and learning from the NSPS story. And I have concluded that it is more important to focus on the performance side of the equation first and get that right. Good performance is based on 3 key things that we do to a certain extent in the Federal Government, but I would not sit here and tell you we do well. We need to do it a lot better, and that is align organizational mission and goals right down through the SES, down to the individual employee's performance, and then have managers and employees regularly having conversations, just like they do in the private sector. Are we on track or off track? And if we're off track, laying out the plan to be back on, and if they're not back on, they're gotten rid of. That's a good performance system. We can do that. And so what I'm going to do, and what we just did yesterday through the Chief Human Capital Officers Council, is we've created a working group made up and chaired by 2 career senior executives, so it won't have political interference or bias. And they will report in on what can we do as the Federal Government to tighten and strengthen our performance system. I think if we get that right, then we can have the discussion about pay, and we can avoid repeating the same mistakes that were made under NSPS.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Director. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. We have recognized the distinguished gentleman from Utah for 5 minutes, and then we'll probably recess to go vote.
Thank you for being here. I want to make sure we get the numbers. That my understanding is, since the time Barack Obama took office until now, there is a net increase of Federal employees, which excludes the uniform, military, census, and postal. The net increase is 157,000 additional Federal workers. Yes?
There is an increase, Mr. Chaffetz, and about 75% of those would be comprised in VA hospitals, Homeland Security, Justice Department.
But the net increase, net increase of Federal employees is roughly 157,000 additional Federal workers.
Yes, sir.
And you did announce in October that you plan to hire an additional 125,000. Not all 125 would be a net increase, but roughly 40,000 to 50,000 would be a net increase in current employment levels in the Federal Government.
I think that number, Mr. Chaffetz, has been overtaken by the President's budget that was submitted, which shows that number staying flat for 3 years now.
My understanding in the President's budget is that he's actually increased the compensation level in his budget by 2.5%, or roughly $6 billion this year over last year.
Well,
Why the increase in why the additional $6 billion? If there's a pay freeze and you're not going to need very many new employees, why a $6 billion increase in that line item?
I would need to understand better exactly what line you're referencing in the budget.
It went from $236,175,000 to $242 million, or I'm sorry, $billion, between 2011 and 2012, based on the executive branch excluding United States Postal Service.
There is a natural growth, sir, of promotions, for example. The President's pay freeze does not prevent people from being promoted based on performance.
So the reality on a pay freeze is the net did not save the American taxpayers money. In fact, it didn't keep them equal. In fact, that number is actually growing, is it not, because of bonuses and step increases and other things?
No. The pay freeze, sir, is a cost of living adjustment that is a definite savings. It saves over $28 billion in 5 years, $60 billion in 10 years.
The reality is it will cost the taxpayers more. Taxpayers will pay more for Federal employees as a whole this year as opposed to the year before.
Had the President not frozen pay, that same number would be $28 billion higher.
I guess what is concerning to many of us is when the President and you, in your very first line, say, quote, President Obama has frozen annual pay adjustments for 2 years. It gives the impression that we're not going to spend more money on personnel. But the reality is we're going to spend billions and billions more because of bonuses and step increases and other things. At the same time, you're hiring additional people. So for the Federal workforce that is working hard, they're somewhat offended because their pay is frozen. Meanwhile, you're out hiring additional people.
Mr. Chaffetz, in the President's pay freeze, he also directed OPM and the Office of Management and Budget to report back to him on a program that will address and deal with bonuses and the reward and incentive program for Federal employees. The Office of Management and Budget and I will be doing that in short order, and we'll look forward to discussing that with you more. But I think you will see that those numbers will change.
My understanding is in 2009, based on a letter that you gave to this committee on February 16th, said that 779,000 people in the Federal Government actually got awards, which is a combination of bonuses and other things. In fact, over 63% of the Federal workers actually got, quote unquote, awards. Why so many people are getting so many awards at a time when people are losing their jobs?
Most of those, you have to understand, with a 2.1 million size workforce, the average number in that GS of those awards is below $1,000. So this is not, these are not the Wall Street bonuses that people are used to when they think of as a bonus. These are recognizing outstanding performance.
That's offensive to a lot of people. 63% of Federal workers got a bonus, got an award. And there are a lot of people out there losing their job. They have their own businesses. They don't understand when the President sends up, oh, we're going to have a pay freeze, and then you're handing out bonuses to get around it. It doesn't make sense. How much money are you going to give away in bonuses this next year?
It works out to be between 1% and 2% of payroll, sir, that is used in bonuses for the GS schedule.
What is the dollar amount of that?
I'll have to get you the exact number for the record, sir.
My understanding, according to FederalTimes.com, which put out a report on December 6th of 2010, it said that more than 3/4 of the 1.4 million general schedule employees will get at least one pay raise between 2011 and 2012.
One of the things that and I will take, it's a legitimate concern to be addressed, and one of the things we can take back to this working group that we've established through the Chico Council is that a fair number?
Do you dispute that number?
I trust you, Mr. Chaffetz. I would presume that you're reading from a legitimate document.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. What we'll do is we'll take a recess to continue to do our votes, and when we reconvene 5 minutes after our last vote should be within about a half hour. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.